Hi, this is Bruce Rawles, and I'm speaking once again with Dr. Bob Rosenthal, who, if you've been following these conversations, is the author of this wonderful new book, um, which I've found very helpful. From Nevermind to Evermind, Transforming the Self to Embrace Miracles. And today we thought we would read, or well, not read, but talk about Chapter 4, which is called The Call of Wholeness. And as I was sharing with Bob, I was trying to think of one word that sort of summarized the idea in this book. I would call it community, but not in a personal sense, but more of a transpersonal sense. I think is where it's headed. But anyway, I thought I'd just let Bob just jump right in and start talking about that, what inspired that chapter and how it fits into the rest and all that.
Yeah. So just to kind of recap, this is the fourth chapter in the book, and the structure was not immediately apparent to me. This is not a book that I sat down and wrote in a linear fashion. I think I mentioned last week that, what is now chapter 3, I tried to start with, and it just wasn't working. And so I feel the hand of the Holy Spirit and or Jesus was very, very evident and helpful. And so the first 3 chapters hung together very naturally. What is the self? We're looking in all the wrong places. Let's deconstruct all of those things that we tend to hold on to and think of as self. All right, get rid of those. What's left? The evermind. The nevermind goes, the evermind stays. Chapter 2, sort of same approach to the world. We think we've got a real world out there. It's based on perception. I'm not even coming at it straight from A Course in Miracles. I'm actually using neuroscience and psychology in chapter 2 as much as the Course to show that everything we think we're seeing really is a matter of interpretation or electrical impulses in different receptors, and that the brain organizes and collects and puts together in ways that not everyone does the same thing. So, the world we're seeing, in no way can it be said to be real. Chapter 3 was really about mystical experiences. We had fun talking about that last time. And that's, all right, when you get rid of the world, what's left? No, it's not an existential, dark, depressive nihilism. The world is just filled with light and love and holiness and a sense of joining with what used to be out there. But for all but a very rare few people, that doesn't last, and it really can't last. And I'm not even sure it'd be helpful if it lasted, because how many of us, if someone were tripping on bliss and going around, we wouldn't go, oh boy, what a great teacher. We wouldn't be able to identify with them. We'd put them on a pedestal and go, wow, they're amazing, and I'll never get there. So I think that state is useful in opening the mind to an experience that it really needs, but that it doesn't need to live in. So I wrote those 3, and then there was kind of a question of what now? And the main goal of this book is to answer or help you answer the question of who am I? Or as the words of the inscribed on the temple of the Delphic oracle in Greece, know thyself. The idea, if you know yourself, you know your destiny, you know the world, etc. And anyone who's a Course student knows that the true self is the Christ, which lives in all of us, which is the same in all of us, which is completely loving and completely whole. But how do we get from here to there? It's one thing to say, yeah, the Course said it, so it's true, I believe it, that's great. It's another to see how that plays out even here in the world. So this 4th chapter, called The Call of Wholeness, the idea was to show that the world we live in, this illusion of a world, these illusions of separate bodies, even there is a constant tension and interplay between the idea that we are separate individuals and the recognition at some deep level that we are much more than that we are a wholeness. So I start out, and I'm not sure why this little anecdote came to me, but way back in the early 80s, I was living in Philadelphia. I was a psychiatric resident, and I was a big basketball fan of the Philadelphia 76ers. Here in the Bay Area, people can definitely relate because it's the Warriors are everything. We have a Thursday night course group, and one of the participants said, "Yeah, I might come," and then it was like, "Oh no, I got invited to watch a Warriors game." Hell with the course. But in 1983, the Philadelphia 76ers won the NBA championships. They won it in resounding fashion, and I was just a total fan, and my wife was absolutely not interested in sports at all. And I felt the need to share that energy, that excitement. And if you lived in a town and been a sports fan where your team has won the championship, the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, what have you, that the whole city, or at least its fan base, really does unite in a very rare and compelling feeling of union. When I look at the pictures from the VE Day and VJ Day parades in New York City after World War II, you see the same feeling, only I think probably way stronger. The war is over. We won the war. Soldiers are coming home. We're all in this together. And of course, in World War II, there was a much more communal sense of participation. It wasn't just a bunch of soldiers going off and, unless you were a family who happened to have a soldier in the war, who cares? No, people grew victory gardens. There were resources that were very scarce. People listened to their radios every night. So thinking about these senses of community, I went back to this elation in my life. And what did I do when they won? I got in my car and I just started driving. And I wound up on a street in Philadelphia called City Line Avenue, which divides the city proper from its suburbs. And all along this, 4-lane road in the center were all of these really happy people, most of them African American, and they were all carrying brooms because we swept the Lakers in 4 straight games. So it was a clean sweep. So everyone was carrying brooms for the sweep. And I drove down that center lane with my hand out the window, and in those days it was high fives, none of this stuff, and just high-fiving everyone. And again, there was no sense of racial boundary. There was no sense of class boundary. There was no sense of, this person is scary or this person is entitled. There was just this wonderful sense of union and elation. And of course, the next day it was gone. And I'm sure had I met any of the broom wielders, in my day-to-day life, we wouldn't have talked to each other. We probably would have avoided each other. And so I was reflecting on that as a very nice example of how some part of us not just recognizes what it is to be in a oneness, but craves it. Mm-hmm. And I do think we crave it. I think that might be one of the most compelling things behind the love of sports. I think it's also, in a darker mode, what's behind some of politics. These are my people. We watch Fox. No, these are my people. We watch, the liberal talk shows. And there's that sense of affiliation around a shared team experience. We have a common purpose. We all know the players. People are wearing jerseys with their numbers. Or in the political realm, around a common worldview that doesn't want to participate in anyone else's worldview. Now, I said earlier that there is an interplay or tension between the desire to join and the desire to remain separate, because after all, this is the ego's world. And we see that in each of those. So what this chapter was attempting to do was demonstrate where the impulse to join comes in, but how ultimately within the world of perception, the ego's world, it fails us because groups within the ego's world may be wonderful and joint, but they're always defined by opposition to some other group.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're here in the San Francisco area and you're a Warriors fan, that's terrific. And as long as you're in San Francisco, you know, you've got a great community. Go to Houston or Boston, they're not going to be so crazy about the Warriors. Whereas, you know, if you're a Celtics fan, I mean, as a young kid, I was a Boston Celtics fan, and my uncle was a Philadelphia 76ers fan, and he'd take us to ball games in Philly. And, you know, my little brother was particularly vociferous about it. And, you know, we were 10, 12 years old, and people were wanting to fight us. So the problem is we have this, call it a drive, if you will, an impetus, a drive towards joining in oneness that always at some point runs up against opposition because the ego defines itself by contrast, by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the animal kingdom, this is not necessarily the case. So I used a couple of animal models, and I have to admit I'm not even positive about the biology behind it all. But you know, I've been in that position of looking at geese flying in the sky, and you know, and they're in V formation, and I've read somewhere that, you know, they share the lead position. It's not one goose that flies from Canada to South Carolina the entire way. They rotate. And yet there's something cohesive about that. You know, it's a unit. You know, if you watch ants, clearly they know what they're doing. I mean, they're insanely intent and programmed, and they're going, you know, if you watch an ant colony and they're bringing food back and materials, and there's just a programming in there that, unless you're trying to get the ants out of your house, is quite beautiful to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't the same sense that we sometimes get in groups, such as, say, a corporation, of, well, why is that guy the director? I know more than he does. You know, how come, you know, she got the promotion? You know, well, she sucks up to the boss and I can't do that. You know, in the ego's world, we are always at some level griping, but animals don't do that. You know, the drone ant doesn't want to be the queen ant. The queen is the queen, and they just know it. So the animal kingdom seems to have less trouble with this, and more of a sense that the individual isn't the entity. And I think this is a very key take home.
Mm-hmm.
Because we think we're individuals, we project that out everywhere. We look at ants and we go, ooh, there's an ant, and there's another ant, and there's another ant. I really don't believe that's how the ants see it. I think ants go, oh, I'm just part of this much greater whole, and I'm directed by pheromones and who knows what other signals. Same thing with the bee colony. You know, you watch honeybees, they're very purposeful as they move from flower to flower. But we humans don't quite have that. And then I wanted to look at some models within human culture that demonstrate this desire to be a part of something that's more stable than just, wow, we won the NBA championships, or you know, one of these fleeting moments of, wow, it all feels really great, or the war's over. And the two organizational structures, if you will, that I looked at were the cult and the tribe. I think they're very similar because each involves a band of people, males and females, who have chosen to live together, work together for a common purpose. There are leaders. There are assigned roles, much like the ants or the geese. They very much want to be there. There's a real sense of belonging, and yet they work in very different ways. And the way I would describe it is one is more top-down, the other is more bottom-up. And let me elaborate. So in a cult, what defines a cult? Well, I'm a psychiatrist. I've read the American Psychiatric Association definitions, and a cult is the first criterion is a charismatic leader who pulls all of these people together, and they are there because of him or her. Without that charismatic person, there is no cult. And indeed, when that charismatic person dies or goes on to do something else, the cult, it usually disappears. In some instances, say Scientology, after LRH died, some of his followers, I think, were able to cement this and keep it going. But what is the appeal of the cult? Well, the cult member can bask in the reflected glow of this brilliant leader who usually is bringing something through that is either from God or from some source that feels divine, or if not divine, that clearly has wisdom and guidance way beyond what the cult members think about. So there's, okay, we're joining in the purpose of sharing the wisdom from this exalted being. But then the darker side, and here's the irony, I want to be part of this group. I want to lose my individuality, but in losing my individuality, I'm being guided by another human being. And I find, and this is a bias of mine, I admit it, to me, this is a problem with some of the Eastern spiritual traditions that use gurus.
Mm-hmm.
And I do understand the guru is your connection to divinity. It is what students of A Course in Miracles do with Jesus, the once historical personage. It is a personal relationship. But with a guru, it's still a human being.
Mm-hmm.
That guru eats, and that guru has bad breath, and that guru goes to the bathroom. And sometimes that guru has sexual urges, or sometimes that guru might have a penchant for alcohol. And so there's a need to keep that cult leader, whether it's as benign as a guru or as malign as the People's Temple in Jonestown, where it ended in mass death. Mm-hmm. There's a desire to keep that being at the top and serve. Now, the impulse to serve is a very it's a very holy impulse, and I think it speaks to some part of us that recognizes we are simply an aspect of a greater whole. We want to serve. But when you start serving a human being, the ego is there. And in a cult, that's just all too evident. So the cult leader is telling people what to do. Hey, I think you should marry this one. In a cult, characteristically, when you join, you give the cult all of your assets. You sell your home, or you move from where you are. You're only going to hang out with other cult members. Cults discourage interactions with people outside the cult, except for recruiting purposes. We are special. And right there is one of the hallmarks of ego. So we're serving a charismatic person. We are special because of that person. And we define our specialness in opposition to all of those other people who are not in the cult and who are therefore needing to be converted. They're not as special. They're dangerous. They become the other. And this leads to all kinds of craziness, like people putting rattlesnakes in mailboxes with Synanon, I think it was, or the kinds of attacks that you hear on the media coming from groups like Scientology, with lawsuits or shunning. We could look at this in sort of a quasi-positive way of this is just the organism, the cult, acting to preserve itself.
Right.
Just as a family would if it was being attacked, just as your body does if it's being attacked. But if our goal is to participate in a oneness, a community, as you were saying, Bruce, that is so much more than what we are, then the cult, at some point, it's less about who are we and more about who are they, and defining that opposition And right there, I think it runs aground.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I was just going to say that the we-they paradigm is inevitable in anything that's, founded on the level of form, because inevitably that premise is flawed. And like you were sharing earlier, that's I think one of the most profound things that is in A Course in Miracles, and probably very few other metaphysical systems, perhaps, and I don't know much about it, Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, but I think that supposedly has that sort of idea that you can have something that has no opposite, and that oneness and that wholeness and that community that we're looking for without opposite is really at the heart of, I think what we're really truly searching for. But we, as you've been giving all these wonderful examples, we try to find in all these different mechanisms, whether it's a sports or political or religious or cult or whatever, or tribe, which we haven't talked about yet. But all those different mechanisms become the avenues by which we attempt to find a community or a oneness. And inevitably, unless we go beyond those, we're going to run up against the special love, special hate coin of the realm, and find ourselves dealing in that, and then it bankrupts us to the real community that's possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. What we're looking for is the oneness, and so following the ego's injunction to seek but do not find, we look for it within the world of form. And we find these analogs. We find things that, oh, it works. Well, almost. Oh, wait a minute. For a while, oh, no, that was terrible. It didn't work at all.
Right.
And in this sense, I would say that groups that we use for that purpose are the group equivalent of a special relationship. The special relationship, the ego is trying to keep God away and love away by saying, no, what you and I have, baby, it's us against the world, we'll make it, and it defines that as love. The cult, or whatever your equivalent is, it's the same thing. It's like we're either special, or in some instances, it is about survival. And that would actually be a good segue for a tribe, because I was saying if a cult is top down, a tribe is really more bottom up. And what do I mean by that? I relied heavily on a book about tribes. I think it was called Tribe. Anyway, if you read and get my book, you'll see it in there. But I was fascinated when I read this because it was describing, Native Americans in the 18th century, and talking about how when the Euro ethnic white settlers would be captured and become members of the tribe, and then the soldiers would come to rescue them, more often than not, they didn't want to be rescued.
I'm doing just fine, thanks.
Yeah.
find another
I'm
person to
really
rescue.
liking it here. This is a much, especially for women. I mean, there was one quote, and I give it in the book, where this woman said, here I can be with a man, I cannot be with a man, I'm respected. If I go back into so-called civilization, it's like I'm crushed. I'm in this role. And I found it very fascinating that within the tribal structure, there wasn't a lot of judgment. People were valued for whatever their contribution was. So again, notice, in a cult, top down, the cult leader is assigning people their functions. In the tribe, bottom up, people come in and they find their functions. I mean, it's very much akin to Course in Miracles, as the Foundation for Inner Peace. We don't go out looking for translators or for wonderful people like Bruce to help us with our website. People show up. And then it's like, oh, you have that skill set. Oh, great. We could use that. Can we talk about, okay, yeah, how much money would you like? Okay, great. Here's what we need. So there's this much more organic process in a tribe or in a group like that, where you're not forcing people to be something they're not, and there isn't an implication of specialness of, well, you join our group and, now you're in. When you're a jet all the way. Yeah, gangs would be a beautiful example of groups that give that affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, the tribe coalesces more. And even the leaders, the chieftains, it was pretty clear from this book, they didn't, on TV, they fight each other and who's going to run it. No, the chiefs tended to be the people who were just the most respected among the entire tribe. People who were liked, people who weren't pompous, people who had shown good sense in the past. And so I was very impressed that the tribal structure felt like something that got very close to what it might look like if a group of individual humans decided to join and affiliate with a common purpose, but in this instance, the purpose being, let's survive.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it, in the woods or the Great Plains, survival was not a given. And a nomadic tribe had to go where the buffalo went or, where the food was. So its purpose was survival, but within the world of form and bodies, that's a pretty compelling purpose. But even there, the problem is, there are other tribes. And if we're competing for resources, and we are, now that other tribe has a real impetus to attack us if we have more resources. You could go farm and kill buffalo and do all of this for yourself, but how much easier to just attack another tribe and take what they had.
Right.
And so this picture of nirvana turns out not to be so wonderful, because when another tribe attacked, guess what? Yes, within the tribe, there was this egalitarian sense of sameness and companionship, but the other tribe saw you as an other. You weren't a human being, and therefore they could enslave you, they could rape you, they could, kill you easily. Not a terribly good model for peace. Would work for a while once again. And here we see another truism of the ego's world of form. Works for a while. But as lesson 133 tells us, if something is truly valuable, it has to be valuable forever. It can't just be a while. I was talking with Jackie Laura Jones on her blog show yesterday, and I was referencing one of the years ago, I should check it more recently, the most popular negative review of A Course in Miracles, which essentially said, I think the world's a pretty nice place, and I just couldn't get into all of this, sort of trashing of the world we live in. I like my friends, I like my life, it's a good life. And you could sort of tell from the writing this was a younger person, and at that age, life does seem to be good. Friends haven't died yet, lovers haven't cheated on you too much, that sort of thing. And I thought, this is the problem. It takes a certain amount of suffering, and that usually does require a certain amount of maturity to get to the place of realizing that, sure, the ego's world can offer you some good things for a while, but just for a while. I think it's lesson 161 that says, value not the form will change. This is as true of the ego's world as anything I can imagine. And so I give an example from my own life in the book of one of the most powerful bonding experiences I had. For about 10 years, I was a screenwriter, amateur, but I had options. I had a TV pilot that one of the top TV agents in LA was trying to shop around. I'm sure they would have then taken it from me, but hey, it was fun while it lasted. But a young actress in Portland, Oregon, decided that she wanted to make my movie, and she was quite resourceful and pulled together her entire small town on the outskirts of Portland, and got sets, and even found the local utility company loaned a cherry picker truck for our crane shots. It was quite amazing. And I describe in the book, I flew out for the first 4 or 5 days of the film shoot. And coming together for a common purpose is, as I said, just a wonderful feeling. Well, here were all of these people on a movie shoot. We're all living in the same house, eating together communally. We're there for a common purpose. And for me, this common purpose was bringing my words, my story that came out of my head, my characters, bringing them to life on film. And so the opening scene, we're on the banks of the Columbia River filming just before sunset, and I am, as elated as I could possibly be in the world of form. Creativity, all of these people working towards my vision, and loving every one of them. I mean, truly, like thank you for being here, and we are all together as one. And then the lead actor showed up. And he was a bit full of himself, and he felt like he could kind of. The director was a very sweet young guy who had never directed a real movie before, and the lead actor just started changing things and turning people. And yours truly had to fly home to take care of his psychiatry patients, and 3 weeks later flew back out for the last couple of days of the shoot. And it was like, I don't know, like being in a town in heaven, and then, some horrible thing happens and it's hell. People were angry, people were depressed, people were dispirited because the entire movie shoot had been basically corrupted by this one actor who, I did it my way. And when 2 months later, I looked at all the footage that we had shot that they put together, and all the places where this guy had changed lines so that scenes basically no longer made sense. He thought he knew what he was doing, but he really didn't. It was just, okay, how do we salvage this? How do we salvage this? And at some point, I realized this is unsalvageable. And for me, it was a wonderful example of, I thought it was going to be one thing, and for a short interval it was, and then it just all fell apart. But here's the key, and I say this in this chapter, what if the actor had been phenomenal? What if the movie had come off exactly as I'd written it? Flawless. Okay, now I'm still on a high. Now this high is lasting months. We enter it in film festivals. What if people absolutely love it? And it got bought out by a studio, and now maybe I'm a couple $100,000 richer with a good deal, and I'm seeing my film out in the world, or people are loving it. All of that's great, but at some point, the people who have seen your film have seen it. At some point, interest dies, people could care less. In Hollywood, you're only as good as what you've done recently, and then the whispers start, he hasn't written anything in quite a while, he's a has-been. My point being that no egoic achievement really lasts. Now, I'll qualify that. If it's something that truly benefits the collective, you invent penicillin, okay, you've made a real contribution. You scribe A Course in Miracles, you've made a real contribution. But in terms of those achievements that we think of, and the Academy Awards are this weekend, and I'll tell you, ever since my film experience, I watch those people get up on the stage and hold that golden Oscar up and give their thank you to this one and thank you to that one, and I know how good they're feeling. And I know that each one of them is going to wake up either the next morning or a week later or maybe 2 weeks later and go, what now? What's my next act? Same thing as with Special Love. The last scene of the movie, The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman has won over Catherine Ross, and they're sitting on this bus, and she's in her wedding gown, and they both have these stupid smiles on their face. And it's like, great, you got her. Now what? You got to live with her. The ego loves the idea of triumph as some future thing, and the moment it becomes real and day to day, it no longer seems so great, and we got to find something else. Now, where in life Do you constantly have to keep looking for something that feels good because the thing that used to feel good wears off? I think they call that addiction.
I was going to say, maybe they call that just life itself.
Well, I think,
to generalize a bit, maybe too much, but if you think about all the things that we think that we need, and how it's just it's this incessant need machine, as Ken Wapnick says, that we have to keep feeding in one way or another, right? I mean,
well, you kind of presaged where I'm going with this.
Okay.
And in my first book, From Plagues to Miracles, I wrote about we're all ego addicts.
Mm-hmm.
Ego addicts in the sense of we need, the ego is like, this hungry animal or this locomotive that has to keep being fed. It has to be special. It can't tolerate anything that's not special. It has to attack in order to prove to itself that it really, that it can survive. I mean, yeah, this is the hallmark of the ego's world.
Mm-hmm.
So any group that we join within the model of within the world of form, even something as quasi-enlightened as a tribe, it's going to fall apart at some point.
Yeah.
Now, when I was thinking about, are there any models that actually work and come close, I came up with two. One, a 12-step group. Why? Because it's whatever, alcoholics or gamblers or sex and love addicts, whatever it is, anonymous. The anonymous is not about, oh, I don't want anyone to know my identity. The anonymous is, I am entering not as a special ego individual. I am entering as an addict, and that is the only reason I am here, and that is my goal, is to recover from that. So here's a group that, there's no top-down structure. Each group can set rules. I mean, not each group has to follow a certain set of rules, but there's no charismatic figure enforcing those. The people who founded AA got out of the way years ago, and yet look how well it's doing in contrast to certain other cultic groups or even religions. You can go to any small town in this country and you will find an AA meeting.
Yep.
So that was one. And then the other model, which I'm even more fond of, and yesterday Jackie read this section from my book, and I was just really moved because it was so true, is a choir. When we join a choir, we join our voice with other voices. And as I said in the book, the sopranos don't envy the bass singers. It's like there's a recognition. We need all of those voices together. And when you're singing in a choir, you can hear your own little individual voice, but really in the singing, it's as if the entire group were you. So there's this joining for a common purpose. Yes, the song ends in real time, but it continues in your head. It can be sung again at any time. So I think that might be the best model we have within the ego's world for what it's like to be part of a group where you're giving, and that giving is also completely perfectly balanced with what you're getting. There's not any real individuality involved. And of course, I think what happens if one person in a choir is like, no, I have a better voice, I'm going to sing louder. Well, it's not a choir anymore. It kind of ruins it, So I think that's our ultimate model. And that, of course, segues with the Song of Prayer, which talks about, that prayer at its highest level is a song, sung by the created to the creator and echoed back from the creator to the created out into infinity. I think it is as beautiful and accurate a description of what we want and what we already have if we unblock our awareness to love's presence, and what we are that we could ever get to. So I'm going to stop there. You did let me talk an awful lot today.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to the choir is I think a lot of musical expressions fall into that category, particularly choirs, of course. And there's one that I sent a link after we talked briefly about this in the previous conversation. the Eric Whitaker. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. That was
No.
a fellow who basically got people from all over the world. And he sent his score out to people all over the planet, literally. And I think there's something like maybe 2,000 people that participated in this global online experiment, where he had videos of all these people singing, and he, with I'm sure a team of people, edited this down to this image where each country was represented by a sphere with all these videos wrapped around it, and the voices were all blended together. But you'd kind of see, almost like going through the solar system, seeing these planets in the video, where each video was, it was, and the arbitrariness of the countries was just something to give it a structure so that you could kind of relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was beautifully done, and the quality of the singing was such that you could, as you were saying, if you listened carefully, you could make out individual voices, but the overall effect was this one thing, this single
Oh,
organism,
wow.
and it's this beautiful experience, and I think a lot of choral work for people who appreciate that get into it. I had a personal experience, that not being any kind of polished musician at all, but years ago I was in a drumming circle in Northern California when I lived in the foothills, and I had so much fun doing
drumming circles, yes.
the polyrhythmic thing. Speaking of tribal kinds of things, I mean, it's sort of almost a cliche, but it was a blast, and I look forward to that so much every week. Going to this drumming class with my buddy Bob Scarlett. A tip of the hat to Bob. He's probably still doing that. And in Nevada City, California. Anyway, he brought everybody together with the spirit of let's work on this together, have fun with it. And there were places where everyone got a chance to solo, but the idea was everyone was doing their part, and the polyrhythmic quality was very much sort of trance-like when you got into it, and it was this sort of mystical union that you could feel. And so I think a lot of musical experiences like that. I mean, people have played in an orchestra or even a band. It doesn't really, that quality of coming together for a shared purpose is really profound, isn't it? And
yes, it is. I mean, the only reason I would focus on a choir is because we all have voices, whereas, as you said, we're not all musicians and we're not all skilled musicians, although I guess not everyone can sing. Also, because instruments are different, now you have different types of contributions coming in. But I imagine the experience of playing in a very tight band is absolutely a one-mindedness experience, that there's just a knowingness among those members of, oh yeah, it's flowing this way, and now Sarah's going to take this and John's going to take that lick, and then it just flows. And so if we're thinking about that here, back to sort of the premise of this talk and what we've been in this chapter, is what's going on, I mean, is the entity, the individual instruments contributing to this, or are they just parts, pieces of a greater whole that is this music, this wonder that shows up for a period of time and then, dissolves back into the silence. And perhaps the silence is also a oneness in its own way. Sitting in a group of meditators where where you're out somewhere where you're not hearing a freeway in the near distance, that silence is very powerful. But again, this chapter, the goal was to set up the next one where, which you and I already talked about to a large extent, where I advance an idea that helps explain how we can think we are so individual and different while actually being one and the same and part of a greater wholeness. And that is the idea of multiple personality disorder, now known as dissociative identity disorder. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk about that a little more in a wrap up, or but if we're looking at how seeming individuals, sort of strike out in their individual ways, but really are still tethered to that oneness, I think that becomes, kind of the ultimate model for living here in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Other thoughts at your end, or?
Oh, I was just kind of flipping through the chapter a little bit once again, and I was thinking that to me the solution, if there is such a word to apply, is the union without opposite. That idea
Yeah.
that there really is a place, and it's always in our mind, ultimately. But we certainly can use the experience we have of being in groups and in various collectives in the world as an opportunity to look at our investment in either going beyond specialness or indulging in it, and just watching what we think that we're contributing or getting out of things, and then just remembering that there's a much greater understanding that's beyond our little separate sense of self that we're learning to
Yeah.
tune into. Yeah.
I just thought of one other sort of riff on this, and that is, why do people join cults, or what is the benefit of the tribe? We want some sense of security. Why do people get into special relationships? On the one hand, especially here in the United States, the myth of the all-competent individual, the mountain man, Jeremiah Johnson, who can go it alone, or the super spy, James Bond, who can take on whatever comes his way. I mean, it's a very compelling and powerful myth. It's kind of the ego's opium. Wow, that's what I want to be. But I think it is just a myth, because nobody survives on their own, or not for long. And we want to affiliate in couples, in families, in larger groups, because there's a sense of safety. There's a sense of you can be taken care of. I was talking to someone the other day who really needed money and for a home purchase, and it just wasn't going to work. It looked like it was going to fall through, and let go of the whole thing, and suddenly thought, let me ask a friend of mine who I think has that kind of money and might be willing to lend it. And sure enough, the friend did have that kind of money, and not only was willing to lend it, friend was Jewish. Friend said, "Thank you for letting me do a mitzvah." Mitzvah in Judaism is a good deed, but really I would see it more as a stepping stone to joining.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my friend got her money, and the other one got to do a mitzvah. This is what we rely on in the group, and we want this sense of being taken care of. But again, to the extent that it relies on other individuals as we see it, or to the extent that the group has its own interests, because Uncle Freddie's never going to give you that money. He's hated you from the time you were 5 years old. To the extent that we're in the world of form, there's always a problem. But when we trust in the Holy Spirit, who, sees the entire picture and can orchestrate it in ways that we never, ever could have imagined, and that is what this friend of mine did, when we go there, now there's that same sense of being taken care of. And it does involve other people, because we're both giving and receiving, but we're not in that place of dependency where, I really need them, and ... what if they don't come through? Or what if they want to come through, but, oh my God, they die, or they're preoccupied? These are all the problems in the ego's world. So we're looking to groups to offer us a certain kind of security, when what we really want to go to is, the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, I shall not lack. He leadeth me beside the still waters, etc. He restoreth my soul. I think I got most of the beginning. That's the experience we're really looking for. And that doesn't come from the world of form and other people. That comes from oneness, from spirit.
Which kind of ties back to that identity that is the all-inclusive identity that A Course in Miracles kind of keeps, leading us beyond the strictures and the confines of a separate self, and encourages us to think, well, what if you could rely on the capital S self that's beyond any boundaries, and then that really does provide all the needs and resolve all the conflicts and addresses all the issues, no matter what they might be. But we have to, as you explain very nicely in these chapters, is we'll have to kind of work into that by using the things in our lives as teaching devices to see that there really is something beyond the specific that we can use the specifics to get to.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you said the capital S self, I heard it as capitalist self.
Oh.
It's like, you need the capital S, uppercase, but the capitalist self is not going to get you where you want to go.
No, nor will the communist self, which
it
kind of ties into the cult tribal dichotomy thing. As long as there's a we and a they, even if it's an egalitarian thing where it's but as long as they're separate selves that have separate issues and values, then ultimately, we need to transcend all of that somehow. Yeah.
But George Orwell's Animal Farm, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others.
I think that's my favorite quote from that book, is because it's
Me too.
Oh yeah, because it basically it sums up the ego's whole slippery slope of thinking that well, okay, as long as we go along with the rules, but let's just bend the rules a little bit in order to make a special interest going, and then it just disintegrates from there, and that ties into the which we didn't even talk about, the whole entropy thing of
I forgot that. Yeah,
it's got to disintegrate somewhere, and that's how it happens is, as long as there's more than one, then it's doomed to fail.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we're all that one. We're all it, and that the innocence and the peace that we're really looking for, and that true comfort and true safety is all within that oneness. And we're all using what we are to find what we are, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and this of course tells us over and over, ideas leave not their source, and we're all ideas. And in that sense, what unites us best are ideas. Now that can still divide, the idea of capitalism versus the idea of communism almost destroyed the world as we know it.
Sure.
But the idea of oneness, the idea of the spirit in you greets the spirit in me, and vice versa. Now that's a path for peace, and a path for living a life that will guarantee peacefulness.
Exactly. Well, great stuff. I've always enjoyed these conversations, and this is no exception. And looking forward to the next one. So, anything else to share? Let me just quickly give your website again.
Yes, thank you.
It's drbob-author.com is the newest one, and there you can find all of Bob's books, including screenplays, which I wasn't aware of until I saw your website, and all the other cool stuff. And
I just put one screenplay up there as a sample. It's fun. It sort of reflects my Course in Miracles bent, but it's about UFOs from Area 51. It's a lot of fun.
I'll have to check it out. I'll check it out.
Yeah, it's a good read. I will say that.
Nice. Yeah, that ufology, we could talk a lot about. My mom saw a whole fleet of those on Catalina Island when she was a teenager, and making an abrupt right angle turn. So that was kind of what got her into metaphysics, which I was tagging along for the ride after that.
Cool. So that's indirectly your entry into all of this.
In some ways, I consider that a pivotal, familial influence of some sort. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you're talking about your screenplay, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I couldn't help but thinking that how that turned out for the best, because you are where you are now, doing what you're doing, and at the same time. And I liked how you used that example. At the same time, I was also thinking it might be interesting to revisit that with filming what took place at the filming, and use that as a model for here's what can happen when there's a John Wayne archetypal character thinking, oh, I know what's best here, and use that as a teaching device for here's what happens when ego runs amok and thinks it knows best, and it could be, with the director's cut commentary, or in this case, the screenwriter's commentary, that could be an interesting movie in itself.
Yeah, if only we had some documentary footage of all the people there. And
really.
No, it was a great learning example. It absolutely was, and that would be fun. You are correct.
Yeah.
I will, with some reluctance, I will share that everyone in my family knew about this, obviously, and I got a call from my brother-in-law one day, and he said, Bob, you've got to see this episode of the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which is, the TV show based on the Terminator.
Okay.
He said, this actor, and I won't mention any name, he's in it, and you got to watch. So I turned it on, and he played a character who the Terminator killed on screen. So I got to watch him being strangled by the Terminator, and my ego's going, yeah.
which ties into that.
But no real harm came to him, and he was paid for that role, and it gratified my baser impulses.
Right. Which again kind of ties into your original story in the beginning of the book of the team spirit and that sort of thing. That it's interesting how the ego's purpose of coming together is always about some victory at the expense of someone else. Yeah. And yet the Holy Spirit's, transcends the whole idea of victory by recognizing that the shared interest is really what's important. And even if it temporarily takes the form of banding it together in a group that appears to be against, some other group, but that it's that impetus to band together that, is, ultimately leads us out of all duality, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And we want it. And it is here with us. Yes. I think that, thank you. One of the most important points, the core, some of the very strictest non-dualists, and Ken Wapnick was one of them, was like, no, there's no connection between, the ego's world of illusion and the oneness. I actually, that is not my experience at all. And the Course even says, love is not absent here, but it is obscure. Mm-hmm. We do love. We just don't love the way God loves, which means that it's not really love in that way. But, I had a mentor therapist back in the day who said to me, you've got to have children. And I was like, well, why would I want to do that? And he said, because it's really important to know what it feels like that you would gladly throw yourself in front of a bus to save the life of someone else. And today, it's like, yeah, that was a very valuable experience to have. Shoot, I lost where I was going with that. Do you remember where? I forget where I was going. Darn. Well, this is what happens when you get above the age of 60.
Well, we were talking about the experience with kids, but also I think before that it was just kind of the banding together for a specific purpose, as opposed to for purely non.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. It was and the idea that spirit is here. We are spirit. It is inherent, or it inheres, despite the world of form and the obstacles that we set up. Right. And therefore, and thank you so much. In this chapter, it was about, we want to join, but as physical bodies, as long as that's our identity, we're never going to do it. And as individual personalities with unique life histories and different skin tones and different races, we're never going to do it because the ego lives off differences. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, but you can still see that desire to become part of an idea that's bigger than self. That's where I wanted to go with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think with training, we can see it in everyone, regardless of whether it appears as an expression of love or sometimes a very distorted call for love, as of course.
Yes. Yeah. A very distorted call for love. Yes. Yeah. But it is there.
It's still there. It's still there. Even in the craziest and most absurd expressions in the world that we see around us, and I think part of that I try to remind myself is my misunderstanding and my lack of perspective of seeing the bigger picture. And when I can remember to keep that in perspective, it's like, I don't have the whole story here, and if I see something that doesn't, if I see something that seems like a chaotic choir, I'm perhaps missing missing the cohesiveness because I don't have the bigger picture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or maybe it's our job to bring the cohesiveness by knowing what we're connected with, or
Yeah. Yeah.
right,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
take this from me and look, take this from me and look upon it, judging it for me,
Right.
and let me not make of it an obstacle to peace. I'm paraphrasing from chapter 19 of the text. Let him judge. You can't do it. And, in the Holy Spirit's judgment, it's going to look different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
And when it does reveal itself to be something different than what you thought. So, for example, yes, my movie shoot fell apart, and at the time it was fairly devastating. It was maybe 9 months later, 10 months later that I started getting the idea for From Plagues to Miracles, and started writing it shortly after that.
Uh-huh.
And that brought me back into my writing, and I walked away from the screenwriting world, and here we are. I don't know. I mean, Bill Whitson, Judy's husband, basically strongly suggested that I should come and join them at the foundation and take it over when they were gone in the middle of my screenwriting years. And I was like, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. I want to win an Oscar. and yet, it's a very beautiful example of how Holy Spirit leads us by showing us that what we thought we wanted, whether we get it or don't get it, it doesn't satisfy.
Exactly.
It's not ultimate. It's not going to be ultimately satisfying.
It never
doesn't bring peace.
Never measures up to our ideals, does it? Yeah,
nope.
Yep.
Nope.
Yep. But there's something that does, and that something is always within us, and we just need to keep seeking and finding it.
Seeking and finding, yes, yes, indeed.
Well, thanks again, Bob.
Right.
Anything else? Any other closing comments for this particular conversation?
Not really. Well, just in terms of the book, there are a lot of really good books about A Course in Miracles, but for some people, just the very idea that art and impersa are discarnate beings that appear is too big a hurdle to get over. It's too bad, because they're pretty good people to get to know.
Oh yeah.
Marianne's books come from a very different angle.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this, if you have relatives or friends who have been curious about A Course in Miracles but just couldn't get into it for one reason or another, I would strongly encourage you to suggest this book, because
definitely.
it was really written with that in mind.
I already have.
Okay, you can come at it from different concepts, different ways of understanding it, and once they have kind of the paradigm in their head, then they can get into the course and go, oh, okay, now I understand what it's saying. And now I understand that when it says Christ, it isn't talking about, the Catholic Church or something.
Right.
The Holy Spirit isn't, some weird, when you have a knowingness about the concepts, it's much easier to get into the course and then use the course's terms to understand them at an even deeper level.
Exactly.
So, so I recommend it for that purpose. I know it's helping my mom get there, and if that were the only reason that I wrote it, that would be enough.
Great.
As we say in Judaism, Dayenu, it's enough.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it really does lay an excellent foundation for particularly for people who are brand new, but also for those who have been studying it for decades, in my case, and find great help in it. So anyway, thank you again, and I'll again post this on ACIM blog, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Lovely, Bruce. Thank you.
Have a great one.
All right, you too.